Hello, this is a lecture on the Vietnam War. I'm going to be as brief as possible because this conflict lasted 20 years in the eyes of Americans and way more than that in the eyes of the Vietnamese. So Vietnam is located in red. It's a predominantly agricultural society. It was under the control of the Chinese for just over 1,000 years and then continued to repel a further occupation for another 800 years. Catholic missionaries brought Catholicism mostly to South Vietnam in this area in the 17th century. And even though it was a small number, it continued to rise, and Christianity made up a significant portion, albeit small, of society in Vietnam, whereas the majority were Buddhist. So the French took control of Vietnam in 1861, and they held control for almost 100 years. During this period of French occupation, the Vietnamese tried to resist as they had with their Chinese occupiers, but not much they could do was successful. That is until the rise of Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a communist, though also a nationalist. He formed many organizations to try to undermine the French and to gain support of like-minded people, the majority of which were exiled or arrested at the end of the 1920s. World War II brought an opportunity for the Vietnamese, with the occupation of Vietnam being undertaken by the Japanese for most of the period because the French were incapacitated, as we learned when we covered World War II. So Ho Chi Minh created the Viet Minh, which was his new organization to unite all Vietnamese people against their common enemies, first the Vietnamese, and then later on it would be the French. They were able to take control of most of Vietnam after Japan was defeated, and because of Japanese action taken during the war, it was easy for them to take control of mostly the north, so this section up here. After World War II, the French still wanted their colony, so a war began in 1947 between North Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, where Ho Chi Minh had control, and the French in the south. The French had gained U.S. support in 1950, where $50 million were given to the French between 1950 and 1952. The war ended in 1954 in French defeat. However, the United States, in its Cold War lenses, did not want either Communist China to the north or the Soviet Union even farther north to have a say in the matters of another Southeast Asian country. So the United States implemented under Ngo Dinh Diem, who was a corrupt ruler, even though he was Catholic and anti-communist, everything the United States wanted in a ruler. He did not have the support of the public in the South, and he ended up being overthrown in a coup by generals in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, so the AVRN, in 1963. He ended up being killed. However, Vietnam was still unstable. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, which began in the north, began sending support for the guerrilla fighters in the south through Laos and Cambodia. So the NLF was formed, the National Liberation Front. It's commonly referred to as the Viet Cong, which Diem called them. So in 1960, this is a picture of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It became very intricate as years went on. So in 1964, There were two events in the Gulf of Tonkin, one on the 2nd and the other on the 4th. On the 2nd, the USS Maddox, which you see here, was patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin, right quite near North Vietnam, and was attacked, or exchanged fire, I should say, with North Vietnamese forces. And then 2 days later, they claimed, along with the USS Turner Joy, that they again received fire. But later on, it was not proved, but it was agreed upon that the report was fabricated to an extent. Johnson took this opportunity to create the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave him total control over the war. In 1965, they implemented Operation Rolling Thunder, which bombed Vietnam. In 1968, as more and more GIs and money was sent to Vietnam, the Vietnamese tried a general uprising known as a Tet Offensive during Lunar New Year in January. And although it resulted in heavy Vietnamese losses, it continued to demonstrate to the American government that the war needed to end. Richard Nixon was elected president in 1968. He continued to increase the war in 1970 by trying to wipe out the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as you see here, in Laos up here and Cambodia. He and the Vietnamese, both in the north and the south, were able to come to an agreement in 1973 to end the war, and all the troops were pulled out in 1973. And in 1975, Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, collapsed.